Hey everybody, so this is the code review again. um, and this one is not totally gonna this one is not really gonna be about any kind of anything that's technical per se. This is more about, I suppose, my experience in the world of work, dealing or if I actually had any kind of experiences associated with like race-based stuff. Somebody actually said, I should go ahead and do a video on that. So I said, okay, why not? So I would say, um, as a software engineer, I have over 20, let's say about over 22 years of experience as a software engineer, working in the industry as a software engineer, um, and it's been great. It's been wonderful. Usually, when you're dealing with engineers, and engineering managers and whatnot, usually most people are thinking of getting a job done, and you're thinking logically about, um, I guess you're thinking with, you usually think that people think with logic, right? And they apply logic to life and daily lives and things that matter in life, as well as what's going on in the job and whether or not you can get things done. So I've worked up and down the East Coast from New York all the way down to Georgia. Um, and I've worked at 11 different places, major large organizations. Um, one startup I worked at. Actually, no, I worked at two startups, and one startup that was extremely successful and was actually acquired. Um, and then the other nine organizations were just your major big standard commercial organizations. So never actually worked directly for the government. So anyway, with all that said, so that's kind of like my background. I already went through some background stuff in other videos. So when it comes specifically to things that I would say in every place that I've worked at, let's say New York has its own little culture and its way of being. New York City in particular. I haven't actually worked in other parts of New York State, but particularly in New York City, it's a very diverse, and you have an expectation that you're going to be working with, all kinds of people. The two organizations that I did work at in New York City were very diverse. I've worked, in the first organization I worked with, it was an organization that was based out, headquartered out in London, London, England, and so the people I worked with were, people that were from UK, England, and so they were white. Some of them were white, I should say, and a lot of people were actually, American white. We had, um, we had people that were from of Indian descent. We had people of Pakistani descent. We had people, um, that were, African Americans. We had white Americans. What else? And we had, people from Croatia. So it was a very diverse mixed group of people, and we all worked well together. We used to have frank discussions about things about all kinds of stuff, and didn't felt that I had any kind of issues at that organization. Moved on to another organization, the one that was a startup, and in that organization it actually was the same. We had people that were of different Asian descents. That would be Indian descent, as well as people from various parts of China. We had people of Latino descent from various parts of Central America and South America. We had people Canadians. Um, I don't think we had any white Europeans. We had white Americans, and we had black people. A couple. Well, just actually two, two actually, or three. I think two or three black people. Including myself. Right. So um, yeah. So that was and, yeah, we had people of Russian descent, I should say, actually. Yeah. So I guess you could say. Um, yeah. So yes, we did have people of Russian descent and other Slavics, other people from Slavic countries. So And that was great. That was great. We had a I think a very cool group of people. We all worked well together. Everybody had respect for each other. And that it was a good time. It was a good time. So then I guess from there, I worked in Maryland. Maryland was, yeah, that organization I worked at there. It was actually, yeah, it was actually just mostly white people. Um, Mostly white people and a few, I would say a few black people. And moved on to Virginia and pretty much the same. In Virginia was where I would say I experienced the first racist. It was the first racist incident. It was, this is just clear racism. I mean, essentially, I was inside of somebody's office, and they were talking to somebody on the phone. The person on the phone didn't know that I was actually in the office, and essentially, the person on the phone began to basically give his opinion about um, a particular group of individuals based on their race, and he was, that individual just being very frank. He was just basically saying that, I think that they won't be able to do X, Y, and Z just because of their race. They won't be able to do it. And I was just like, wow. I looked I looked at the individual who he was on the phone with, and he looked at me, and there were actually two other people in the room. They looked at me, and then he just essentially said, "Oh, then he just sort of like ushered me out of the office. Oh, we'll talk later. I'll talk to you." And then after that, what was so funny is, I went back to my office and I sat there, and then he came into my office eventually, and he said, "Oh, we don't do business like that. We don't do business like that. Blah blah blah." And he gave me a big explanation and all that kind of stuff, and I was just like, okay. I mean, to me, was I upset about it? No, not really, because to me, the individual on the phone was just being frank about his particular perspective and his experience and what he believes. So I'm just like, okay, cool, well, whatever. I mean, it's just good to know, right? It's good to know that that's how you're perceived. Um, and so it's just like, wow, that's interesting. So that was up until that point in time. I think that was probably in the working world. That was the first, racist thing that I actually, witnessed there. Now, when I say I guess racist, I guess it was in the kind of situation that can actually deny somebody an economic opportunity based on just because of their race, right? So, and different from I mean, clearly racism also has a form of prejudging in it, you know, which means prejudice, right? So, but anyway, so that was that. So then, after that organization, went to another organization in, also in Virginia, and I experienced, I would say I experienced some more so prejudice behaviors, as well as direct, yeah, comments that were straight prejudicial on it. So, um, directed, slightly, I would say slightly towards me. Um, and I don't get into the whole, thing. Obviously, is, throughout your career, you always hear jokes that may be racist, either against you or against someone else. Usually, I don't get involved in or or entangled or any kind of stuff like that. Usually, I just like that doesn't it doesn't entertain me. You know. All right. So anyway, but um, anyway, so that was an experience. All right. So it was just like, wow, okay, well, what's up? In those particular situations, or I should say, in that particular situation, I had to speak. I spoke to that individual directly, just to let them understand that, whatever you think, that's fine. I don't really, I can't really, I'm not really going to do anything about that. But the reality is, you know, I can, me personally, I can, let's see, hmm, outperform you. Let's just say that in anything, just name it. So that's pretty much the way I handle it. Right? And of course, there was just no, no cell phone. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to get to this individual later. But anyway, right, so anyway, there was nothing that else that resulted from that other than they would just sort of, you know, steer clear of having those kinds of discussions around me again. So there was that. So then from there I moved on, went to, I think that was pretty much it. And I've worked at other places, and I haven't say experienced any kind of other direct racism, or prejudice directed towards myself or overhearing it against any other people, right? So that's that. I've worked at places, um, I'd say, let me say, there's one organization that I worked at that was, it's in the Maryland, Virginia area, very large. I'm not going to name the organization, very large, what you call it, is a very large insurance organization. So I probably just gave it away, right? But anyway, so working there, they had a large, very, very large population of people of Indian descent. Um, and I remember walking into the cafeteria and I was like, wow. I was surprised. Up until that point, I haven't seen such a large group of people of Indian descent, pretty much, working at an organization. So yeah, so it was cool. Everybody was very nice, very welcoming, and very cool though. So there's never experienced any kind of um, issues there. They were all very welcoming. We were very cool. We had a good time, got along very well. So so that was interesting. It was a good experience. Um, and I would say in the Georgia area, I did also work with a group of people, and like I said, I think I gave that experience of working in the office or having to go from remote to directly working in the office, even though I didn't work with anybody in that office. So when I actually moved to the office after working remote for quite a long time, in the office that I was at in Georgia, there's a group of people of Indian descent that I tried to, befriend. They're a bunch of they were a bunch of software engineers, right? And I tried to befriend them and sort of get into their group or whatever it is. But it's kind of like I was kind of like held at arm's length, right? So, and whether or not that's because of my race, I can't really say, right? Because usually when you're working in a group of people for a while, you get a sense of camaraderie, and maybe it becomes cliquey-ish, like click-like, you're like a little clique, a group, whatever it is. And other people coming into that group or trying to come into that group, you may not just allow that, just for whatever. It may not have anything to do with race. It's just you feel comfortable among, this group of people that you've been working with for a while and you're working closely with. And so at that organization in Georgia, as I said, working from home and then moving to the office under the guise that, oh, we work in the office and it's going to be much more productive and we're going to build camaraderie and morale is going to increase and all that kind of stuff was, oh, I guess maybe it was good for some people. Me particularly myself, no. As I do, I tried to engage with these individuals, but it didn't work. And maybe it just didn't work mostly, I think, because we didn't work on the same things. We didn't work on, the same kind of project. There was nothing. There was no camaraderie. There was nothing that actually um, binded us together, in order to like build a sense of camaraderie and fun and development of our own little war stories and all that kind of stuff. No, there was none of that. So even though I'm like a very kind of, I would say, person that likes to engage and talk with other people, it wasn't happening. So I was like, okay, well, and that was this is pretty much that. But I've seen that a lot too in the tech world where you have certain clicks and stuff like that, and usually that kind of develops too based on the projects that you're working on and whatnot. So there's that, and that's it. That's been my experience. I'd say out of my 22 plus year career, I've only worked with two out of all the places I've been at, two other engineers who were black men. Um, no black women that were actually like software engineers. Um, but two other black men that were software engineers. That's it. Um, that's kind of funny, right? So yeah, I've never. It's just well, I guess that's just yeah, that's just my experience anyway. So um, yeah. So and I'd say I remember around 2008, I think when President Obama became president. Um, or I think it was 2008ish or something like that. Whenever that happened. But yeah, during that time, there was a lot of different conversations in the office related to related to that, and clearly it's oh he's the first first black president of the United States. I was like yeah okay yeah that's cool. It's interesting. I sat down. I said yeah. So I had a discussion with one of the a project manager at the time at the organization I was working at, and I'm like, well, how does that work, right? How does that work? Because as far as I understand, his father is of African descent, and his mother, as far as I understand, is Caucasian. I think white American Caucasian descent. So how does it work where we just sort of just say that he's the first black president, right? Um, so to me, when I hear that, to me, it's like it's a form of racism, right? Maybe that's the social construct, right? The social construct of racism, which is devoid of the scientific aspect of his biological existence, right? Meaning that biologically he's part of African descent and part of Caucasian white descent. So so wouldn't he be the first, I would say, biracial president? Half black, half white. At least that's the way I think about it, right? Um, so the fact that you have society, both white, both black, Chinese, Latinos, everybody agreeing that he's the first, African American president, to me basically says that it shows the racial construct that exists, that is the social norm that is, I guess, the social norm that exists and that permeates throughout society, that is pretty much the agreed on norm or social construct that everyone participates in and agrees to. That inherently of itself is racist just based on that statement. I think it seems to me, at least, just thinking from a logical standpoint, that's kind of like the way because so at what point, I guess the question that I was having a discussion with that person is like, at what point does that, like, does it kind of like make sense or not make sense, right? At what point does a person actually become, this black person versus this white person, or this white person versus this black person, in terms of, I guess, is based on appearance. There's no doubt about that, right? No doubt. That's one. Because I guess if his appearance was more of the Caucasian, meaning he looks more white, then I guess he would be would he still be the first black president? I don't know. That's one thing. That's the question that I wonder, right? Meaning that he he basically has the same parents, but he just comes out basically looking white. Would he be the first black president? Right? Okay. So that's the funny thing. I don't know. I often wonder that kind of question, that situation, and then you have to, since the statement is racist, at least to me, I determined it seems to be racist because, like I said, it basically just means to me, he doesn't really, his Caucasian descent doesn't really mean anything because he's black. But it also means to me that uh, at some point the 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 African aspect, or the African descent, eclipses the Caucasian part. Um, it's sort of like it renders it non-existent, right? Um, which is, I don't understand that one. That, I mean, I should say I understand it in from the social construct, right? It's a social thing, not a biological scientific thing. Um, so that's wild to me, right? So then you got to ask. To take it even further, then you ask yourself, or I'm basically discussing with this individual, and I like to try to discuss these things with people, but usually they don't want to. It doesn't continue to go. Um, so at what point does just I guess we're just discussing African and white, but as obviously this can be for any kind of race, but where there's supposed so, to me I don't really believe totally in well let's just it could be for any race, but at what point does the African eclipse the white in terms of when it comes to biological material, right? So, like, let's say, for example, if we were to take a embryo, not an embryo, let's say we take an egg that was fertilized. Well, we take an egg from a person of African descent and we fertilize that egg with a black black male's sperm, and then we take that egg and we put it into a white female. When the white female has the baby, will that baby be considered to be black or white, or is it considered to be biracial? Huh? So that's one. That's interesting. I mean, really, I believe the baby's going to be considered to be black, right? Because that's when it's born, most likely the racial makeup will actually make it black because well that's where the DNA came from, right? There are cases, of course, where I believe that um, well actually I can't even I'm not going to go into that, but let's go into the opposite direction. Let's say you take an egg from a white woman and the sperm of a white man and it's fertilized that way, and then you take that combination of that fertilized egg and you put it into a black woman. Is that baby that comes out of the black woman considered to be white or a black? I mean, I guess based on appearance, it would probably be white, right? But would they actually take it at the hospital when they see the baby coming on out and they don't know the background of the parent? Would they actually say, or meaning they don't understand that the egg came from a white couple? Um, would they say that the baby is of African descent and is an African American baby as opposed to being white? And then the same thing for the other situation that I said, right? To me, that's funny, right? That's funny in how that actually is determined and how that works, as in the social fabric of things, right? um, all right, so then at what point? Then you got to take it even further, right? So at what point, like I said, does the African eclipse and cause the Caucasian part not to matter anymore, right? So then, because you can take it down to generations, because you can say, okay, so we have a black and white person get together, they create the biracial kid. Now the biracial kid goes and has relations with a white person, and then they have a kid, and then that kid then has relations with another white person, and they have a kid. So now the relations keep going, and it's just all white, right? But at what point now does it does the kids from those relationships are at what point are they considered white, where the whiteness has then essentially uh, uh, just continues to the point where the black stuff has been drained out. The black, right? I don't know. That's one thing I wonder, right? And then the same thing on the other side, right? So let's say you got the same thing where you have a person that is of biracial descent, and they just get with a black person, and then their kid just continues to have relations with black people. So are the kids continue they're all see, and that's the thing, social from a social construct, those kids are all black. Whereas on the other side, right, they're on the other side, well, that's also all black. But at what point, there's a point where you get to a point where it'll stop. Oh, okay, well, hey, all right, they're not black anymore. They're more whitish, right? So, And I guess it's based on the social construct, the appearance, right? And not necessarily a biological makeup. Well, we can get to that because that's the other part, right? So, from a biological makeup, that's another thing, right? So, and that usually only happens when we get more data, more information, and we just don't go off the visual appearance. But in the case of President Obama, we have all the information, we have all the insight, we have all that knowledge, but from a social construct, we say that he's the first African American president. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting. That was an interesting conversation that I had with some individuals around that time at work. Um, so I don't know. I'd love to hear what you guys think on that matter and what does that mean? What does it really mean? Um, I can't say that I have um, um, that any kind of prejudiceness or racism actually has deterred me from stopping to actually try to get a particular opportunity at any place that I wanted to work at. Now, has it actually stopped me from actually getting an opportunity? It's quite possible. Yeah, meaning that somebody didn't want to hire me just because, hey, I'm black. So is it possible? Quite possible, sure. Um, whether or not it matters, I guess really is up to you. Um, whether or not you care about that, whether or not it actually deters you.